The Tempests. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's episode will be completely different from what you are normally used to. I'm going to explain to you how one man became a South African icon in Formula Ford racing in South Africa, and his name is Dennis Temple.
Worried by a man who's built a motor car in South Africa himself. That's Dennis Temple. He's called his car the Tempest.
Dennis came from humble beginnings, a hard-working young man. Dennis started his racing in karts and then graduated up to the duplex Formula Ford, and from there he bought Bobby Scott's Merlin Mach 29, which Bobby Scott had used to race in the Formula Ford Festival in the UK. Dennis raced the Mach 29 in the South African Championship until February 1980, when after he and Denise sold everything they owned, they moved to the UK to try and make it as a professional racing driver. Dennis and Denise, after selling everything, had enough money to get to the UK and buy a Merlin Formula Ford. Dennis would work at Colchester Racing Developments alongside Selwyn Hayward and his brother Clive. Dennis and his wife Denise lived in a caravan on the property of Colchester Racing Developments and had keys to the workshop to use the facilities when they needed. Dennis had acquired another caravan which he turned into a workshop. Dennis built his own Mach 31 Merlin. He supplied the engine and gearbox, and this was chassis 544, and this would be the 7th Merlin Mach 31 made. This would be Dennis's racing car to make his career in the UK. Dennis's day job was a tool maker for Selwyn's brother Clive, who owned the CRD Tool and Engineering Company, which was part of Colchester. Dennis raced his Merlin Mach 31 in the Townsend Thorson Formula Ford Championship. Among the many names he raced against is Tommy Bone, Rick Morris, Roberto Moreno, Julian Bailey, Jonathan Palm, and the list carries on. Dennis, while racing the Merlin, had started thinking to make his own cars, and the Merlin became a Merlin Tempest as he refined it and improved it to be more competitive. The journey in England came to a halt, unfortunately. He and his wife came back to South Africa. With barely enough money to bring the Merlin back home with them from England, they had to start again. Dennis campaigned the car in the South African Formula Ford series before having a massive crash in Cape Town, which destroyed the car. The most famous thing about it was after the crash, he got out the car, and there's a photograph of him stood next to the racetrack and had a cigarette. But this started a new legacy for Dennis, something bigger. With the crashed Merlin, he started to build his own car. Thus came the Tempest Mach 1, which used bits of the Merlin into his own designed and built chassis and car and suspension and all of that. It was only way to say it. An underrated and super intelligent man and fast driver. He had all the capabilities in the world, but not necessarily the funds to pull it off, as others did. But the fact that his legacy still lasts today is impressive. And although many people they don't have the best views on it because they don't know. The fact that the cars can still win means they were good, means they're good. This was the start of Dennis. This car was very competitive, running up front from the get-go. It was a good car, out the box. Dennis would win races, and he was always up front. This drew an interest in the Tempest brand, which meant they're producing customer cars. The Tempest Mach 1 became the Tempest Mach 2, which was the next evolution, making it 3 customer cars. Among the many connections and good friends that Dennis had was Bruce Harry. Bruce came out from the UK to South Africa for Firestone. Bruce would become a family friend of Dennis and do lots of testing and helping Dennis along. Bruce Harry was one of the founders who worked with Bruce McLaren building up McLaren Motor Racing. The Tempests are good cars and very competitive against also locally made Matadors and so on. But against the Rays and the Van Diemen's and everything, the Tempests were right up there. After progression of years, as times moved on, wheel tracks changed, rules changed, cars became faster and wider. Dennis knew what he had to do. Thus came the Tempest Mach 3. Radically new shape, radically new aeroducting
Straight into the lead,
for
George
South
Ferreira,
Africa.
closely followed by Pierluigi. Basil Mann in the wet Reynard has got himself into third spot ahead of Dave Sinclair and Dennis Temple as they come out of Continental Corner and head down one of the fastest straights right on his tail. Then Basil Mann, he's been worried by a man who's built a motor car in South Africa himself. That's Dennis Temple. He's called his car the Tempest. And it's back markers as Basil Mann comes up on one of the back markers. He's bringing Dennis Temple with him as they go down at the 50-meter mark. They just dab the brakes, go down again, keep it full straight by a stint of slipstreaming. Here's Basil Mann and Dennis Temple. Harvey Coast has got Dave Sinclair, the man who builds the Rainbow corner. Basil Mann still got Dennis Temple tailing. Harvey Coast is right hand as they come through. Here's Basil Mann. Temple's now got Harvey Coast giving him lots of attention. He's brought along Dave wanting to do better this time. He clinched a third spot. George Ferreira wants to turn the tables on Ferro as they go away from the starting line. It's George Ferreira takes the lead once again. Ferro worrying him. The Bosch WAP Reynard of Basil Mann is right in behind them. Harvey Coast is next. Then we've got Tony White to worry him because he knows that Ferro is going to come from either side. He comes at him out of the sun on any corner. This is the SKF Super Tyres Van Diemen. That's built in, and there's Basil Mann with Dennis Temple. That's the Tempest in fourth position. A very good performance by the South African built car. Dave Sinclair, who builds the Rays in South Africa, is not too far behind us. No answer. Here's Basil Mann in third spot, and then it's Dennis Temple being worried there by the Ray.
This was an extremely slippery shape that was not in South African motorsport at that time. So he was really revolutionizing South African motorsport. After Dennis's success in the Mach 3 and some customer cars were produced, there was a change in South African motorsport. Formula Ford was not the big deal anymore. Formula GTI had been created, South Africa's version of Formula Ford 2000. This was the South African Drivers' Championship, so naturally it drew all the big names there, and Dennis was one of them. Between 89 and 90, Dennis produced the Tempest Formula GTI. This car had an unfortunate fate. The powers that be did not want Dennis in Formula GTI, and although he had fulfilled their requirements and had to fight to prove that he had fulfilled the requirements, they did not want him there and they did not make him feel welcome. At the same time, although he had built these fantastic Tempest GTIs, that he had become ill with cancer. Between politics, finances, and Dennis being ill, it slowed the progression of the cars, and Dennis had to step back from racing. In 1996, the dream of Formula GTI came to an end, and Dennis converted his GTI back to a Formula 4. However, he was now too ill to race. He was going to have Gary Law race his cars, who was an apprentice at his engineering firm. Gary didn't have the success Dennis had, and sadly the car was crashed later on at Midvale Raceway. In 1998, Dennis passed away, unfortunately. That car behind me is a car my dad and I rebuilt. It's actually one of Dennis's Tempests. It's his Mach 2, to be exact. Dennis made a whole range of Formula Fords and later Formula GTI cars that were very successful. South African built in design. However, he still remained underrated. but he was one of the best in the country. Crazy that. We have Formula Ford has been now rebuilt back, and these the two cars will be reunited. One can only say what an impressive feat and career Dennis had. Racing here, off to England, hanging it with all the big names there, coming back, starting again, and making a legacy. He is a true icon of South African motor racing.